The break is over. Peak is officially back. Kagurabachi Chapter 83 just dropped, so let's get straight into it. Alright, so the chapter actually begins with a flashback. We see Shiba and Chihiro in Chihiro's hospital room after his first encounter with Samura. And we pick up on their conversation where Shiba was filling in Chihiro on a bunch of things. So the chapter begins with Chihiro saying, "The malediction." So that's the Sanuchi's power. And Shiba says, "Rokuhira didn't talk about it, but he didn't intend to hide it from you forever. It was just too much to share with you at such a young age." And we see Chihiro think back to a memory of his father where he said, slowly but surely we'll learn to do this together. And so in the present, Chihiro says, "I understand. 200,000 lives." And he thinks again back to what his father said about how, as swordsmiths, we are complicit in the deaths that our tools cause. And Shiba looks at him and just says, this is why he sealed up the enchanted blades. Without them, the people of this country would have been massacred. But even so, Rokuhira was racked with guilt for forging them. And so Chihiro just says, then why did he give me this, holding his enchanted blade? And we see that chapter 83 is called The Enten. We then cut back to the present where we see the aftermath of this clash between Samura and Chihiro that we saw at the end of the previous chapter. They are still airborne, having just connected swords. And we see that Chihiro is thinking to himself, his strength is insane. If I had tried to counter that blow instead of deflecting it, he would have sliced my arm clean off. We then get some narration that says, there's a saying from the Sete War that's fitting. When black birds flock, death is nigh. It's obvious where that saying comes from. And we get this panel of Samura just being surrounded by all of these black feathers falling around him. So the two of them now are just in a face-off, staring each other down after that first clash. And Samura says, "Show me, huh? What on earth do you want to show me?" And Chihiro says, "There's a way to prevent the malediction without sacrificing any lives." And Samura says, "There's no way." And Chihiro says, "We destroy it. We destroy the Sanuchi. It's the source of the eternal contracts. If it were to be destroyed, the contracts would become null. Nobody has to die." And Samura says, "If only we could just destroy it. After the war, we tried everything we could think of, and we couldn't even scratch it. I heard you broke the cloud gouger, but sword fighting is similar to physical augmentation. The strength of the blade varies greatly depending on the wielder's skill and spirit energy. Whoever was wielding the enchanted blade must have been some really puny thug for it to break. We're talking about a man they call the Sword Master, and Kunishige Rokuhira's Sanuchi, that sword, is indestructible." Samura then continues and says, "Just the Sword Master and I have to die. It's the best and only way." Chihiro then thinks to himself, here it comes, crow. He swaps places with the black feathers floating in the air. Maybe it's because I've honed my sword skills, but more than ever, the sword feels deeply integrated with my hand. My nishiki flows more lightly and naturally than before. And we see that there's just like this moment of silence as they're staring each other down, and then boom, Samura teleports with one of his feathers. What follows next is no dialogue and just like 3 straight pages of action choreography. So Samura teleports to a feather behind Chihiro, and Chihiro immediately turns to slice at it. But as soon as he does, Samura is no longer there, and he has teleported again behind Chihiro. And Chihiro immediately whips around and does a Kuro long distance slash to try to deflect that one. And then we see that Samura just continuously keeps teleporting around to try and get slashes off on Chihiro. But every time he is barely able to react somewhat to it to be able to either evade or dodge it. And so Chihiro, we again get his internal monologue, and he's thinking, even with Nishiki, I can barely evade him. But I see it now. Right before he switches places, there's a trace of spirit energy. And we see him focusing on a feather, and he goes, now. And he goes to preemptively strike the feather where he thinks Samura is going to appear. But instead of Samura appearing there, just his enchanted blade does. And Chihiro goes, only his sword. And Samura says, gotcha. And he himself teleported to a different feather, and he grabs Chihiro from behind. And Samura out loud says, I figured out yours too. Okay, just for clarity, I actually missed a speech bubble. So Samura says, that was impressive. You figured out how to read my movements, but I've figured out yours too. And so as he teleports behind Chihiro and is kind of grabbing him, he then grabs a feather nearby that he teleports his sword into. So then he goes to make a strike. And once again, Chihiro is able to like barely deflect this. We then see the two of them struggling in this clash of blades, but Samura gets the upper hand and is able to deflect away Chihiro's sword, disarming him in the process. He then kicks Chihiro off the roof that they were standing on, and he plummets down into a pond below. Meanwhile, the Enten gets lodged in the roof next to Samura, and we see Samura think to himself, what just happened? We then get some narration that says, when Kunishige Rokuhira forged the enchanted blades, he didn't craft their power specifically, only their general intended purpose, to kill or to protect. The original 6 swords were intended as instruments of war to defeat the enemy. We then cut in with Chihiro as he is just kind of like plummeting down in the water, and he thinks back to like forging the swords with his father. And the narration continues, or actually we find out that it's not narration, but it's actually Shiba speaking to Chihiro, and he continues and says, but the 7th sword, Enten, is different. We then cut back to that hospital flashback where Shiba continues. He says, it was the only time in Rokuhira's career as a master swordsmith that he co-created a sword with someone. And Chihiro says, all I did was follow what he told me to do. And we get this panel of a young Chihiro forging away with his father. Shiba then continues and says, right after the war, your dad tried to destroy the enchanted blades, but they were masterpieces, forged with daten seki, a material beyond human comprehension. So every attempt to destroy them failed. And not just the Sanuchi. We tried to destroy all of them, and they all failed. So after that, for nearly 15 years, your father struggled in the darkness with the knowledge of what he'd created, the enchanted blades and the malediction. But all along, you were his guiding light, Chihiro, illuminating a path forward. The Enten was that path, and you used it to destroy the Cloud Gouger. Sure, Sojo wasn't a swordsman. He wasn't as proficient with the blade as its previous owner, but even still, he was a strong fighter. It wasn't just his failure. There's no question. It was also your success. And you were able to course correct that katana, which had been compromised from its true intent, referring to Chihiro then wielding the Cloud Gouger after Sojo had corrupted it. We then cut back to the present where we see that Chihiro has now regained himself and is now standing in the middle of this pond, having a face-off with Samura, who's still on the roof. And Shiba's words continue from that flashback. They say, to face the past and connect it to the future. Perhaps that was the purpose Rokuhira infused into the Enten. And that day, referring to when he broke Cloud Gouger, you were able to draw out that power. We then zoom in on Chihiro, and he's thinking to himself about the Swordmaster and also Samura, and about how they are still so far ahead of him. They are distant figures. But nonetheless, he reaches down into the pond where we see a black goldfish swimming, and he thinks back to what his father said about we need to have principles and accountability. The weight of malediction must have been extraordinarily heavy. And we cut back to the hospital room flashback where Chihiro says, then Enten's true realm, and Shiba says, yeah. And we have another flashback to a young Chihiro speaking to his father saying, I'm committed to taking this on. We then cut all the way back to the present where Chihiro's hand reaches for that goldfish and it turns into the Enten. And then the chapter ends with this final full-page panel of Chihiro saying, with the Enten, I'll destroy the Sanuchi. And this was so cold. He copied Samura's crow, I'm assuming with Akka, so that he could teleport his sword to him via the goldfish thing instead of a crow feather. At least I'm assuming that's what happened, but if you guys had a different interpretation, let me know. But this chapter was peak. The break week was worth it. Hokuzono, always take as much time as you need for your health, my guy. We will be here seated and waiting, and I cannot wait for the next chapter, okay? Give me the next round in this bout. I think things are about to get really interesting. But found out some really incredible things here, right? We finally found out the true nature and story of why the Enten was created. Kunishige did make it to try and destroy the other blades, and he only did so because it was this first co-created sword with his son looking toward the future. Like, there's so much beautiful like poetry in that, like something that he couldn't accomplish on his own, and that it is going to be the next generation that will hopefully be better than him, you know what I mean? And Chihiro kind of realizing that, and realizing its potential, you know, doing that against Sojo, and now realizing like that is its true realm, that is its true purpose, and that is what he is here to do. So great. I cannot wait to see what happens from this. And it seems as if Samura might have even clocked the fact that the Enten might be capable of this. In that final clash when he was like, what was that? I think he might realize that, okay, Chihiro might be onto something here. And that just makes me wonder where this is going to go, right? Because is there a chance for a de-escalation here? It almost seems as if Chihiro is going to have to break Samura's sword, which will kind of forcibly exit him from this situation. This is something I've talked about in a previous video, so I don't want to get too long-winded. Like, even if the Tobe Mune breaks, like maybe Samura could still put in some work just with a normal blade, but obviously he's going to be severely handicapped. And you know that personally, I don't think no matter what happens, Samura is probably not long for this world. But I'm just wondering, like, will Chihiro get through to him and they will be aligned? Or is it going to take, like, Chihiro defeating him, again, perhaps even breaking the sword to prove that function to him fully before he'll become on board? So I'm just interested to see how this actually wraps up between them. Obviously, Samura is not going to win ultimately, I don't think, because that would just be a retread of what we've already seen, like Chihiro dying but being resurrected. So Samura is either going to acquiesce and they don't actually finish this duel, or the sword's going to break, forcing Samura to recognize the potential of their plan, right? And I'm assuming it's going to be the latter, which again sucks because then Samura is heavily nerfed, but it is what it is. But what do y'all think's about to happen here? I'm also curious to see what role Iori might still play in this situation. And obviously she's going to have a role, but I more so mean like in this immediate moment. Like, could she pop up and interject into this clash or impact it in any way? Or will Chihiro and Samura get to fully resolve, and then Iori and Samura stuff will kind of take place after that? Interested to see kind of the route Hokuzono takes here. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. As always, let me know all of your thoughts on this chapter down below, or better yet, come join the Discord and talk Kagurabachi with us there. We've got an amazing little Kagurabachi community forming, and this week I got to join in on a new tradition that started where a bunch of us get in the voice chat and kind of read through the chapter together right when it drops. So that was actually a lot of fun. So yeah, come be a part of that with us. But as always, y'all, thank you for watching.